Greetings, everyone. How you doing? This is Coach Fleischer, and I hope this finds everybody doing well. And for today, we are looking at our virtual lab pertaining to the muscles of the back. Now, there are a ton of different muscles in the back, but in general, when you work with clients and patients and athletes, you'll be kind of focusing on these four. And I threw a fifth one in here, and I'll explain that in a second. So the biggie you have up in the upper left-hand corner here, you have the skeleton rotating around the lats, latissimus dorsi, originate down in the waist area, right, and attach up to the upper arm. And if you're having a lat pull down, you feel those guys, or you can feel those guys working, both narrow grip and wide grip. When you look at rhomboids, this one's not turning around, so I don't have to wait for them to come back around. The rhomboids themselves originate on the spine and then attach out on the shoulder blade. And when they contract, they pull the shoulder blades together, they adduct them, they also rotate the shoulder blades slightly as well, kind of like in an inward and upward direction. So rhomboids themselves and lats, those are the two biggies that you'll usually focus on in a gym. People will do lat pull down wide, lat pull down narrow, and they'll do seated row, dumbbell rows, etc. Erector spinae, you'll see people do hyperextension on a 45-degree bench or a ball, and those muscles actually, when you look at erector spinae, so named, incidentally, because they help keep the spine erect and upright. And so with erector spinae, it's not as though you have one big, long, ropey muscle. It's actually, these muscles, they actually originate and connect, originate and connect, and originate and connect at different levels up through the spinal column, or on the back side of the spinal column to be more accurate. And they help articulate at an intervertebral level, right? So each vertebrae itself kind of articulates bit by bit by bit. And I always describe it this way when doing hyperextension. So it's not from the hip when you do a hyperextension. You actually want to think more bit by bit. And then trapezius. With traps, you'll oftentimes hear people talk about doing shrugs, dumbbell shrugs, barbell shrugs. That's trap all day long, as well as a couple little ancillary muscles up in this neck area. Large kind of kite-shaped muscle, with one spine of the kite going from shoulder to shoulder, the other one running down the back of the spine, to be quite honest, from the base of the skull down to the lumbar region. And with the trapezius muscle group, you can fire different areas of the muscle group itself by changing the position of the upper arm. So if you change the GH joint to glenohumeral joint position, you ask the muscles to fire differently in the trapezius group. Now, one thing I do throw into this group, though it is not a back muscle, it's actually more shoulder girdle, is the external rotators of the shoulder. Specifically, when you look at the rotator cuff group, there are three of them. Because when you look at people in their day-to-day lives, they tend to be kind of slumped over, rounded over, and they look like a question mark. And when you talk about the posterior chain of the body, it is literally lats, rhomboids, erector spinae, trapezius, and then the external rotators of the shoulder. It is those five muscle groups, 5 muscles in one muscle group, that actually allows clients to actually stand more upright and be more erect. And you have to really look at this in terms of the activities of daily living. When you look at like what people do all day, they sit at a desk, they're typing on somebody else's computer, shuffling somebody else's paperwork, and they look like a question mark because they're sitting there all day long. And you get them into a coached or trained environment, you get them out of that question mark position, you try to make them an exclamation point. And I'm telling you, for a lot of people, it's kind of quirky because they end up having this kind of negative feedback loop associated with working for somebody else and having a cruddy boss, etc. And they're in this kind of crunched over, slouched question mark position. And the first thing you do is you get them into a training environment and you get them upright and get them straight like an exclamation point. It's kind of liberating for them. So keep that in mind as we go through this. And the traps themselves, so often people will come in, oh my God, my neck is killing me. It's actually their traps because they're carrying a ton of stress in the traps or the muscles around the neck, partially because of their positioning, the way they sit all day. Their head has mass to it, and the muscles in the neck have to fire to keep the head from falling off their shoulders and onto their desk. But also, you have those muscles are being used to help keep a person in that kind of semi-question mark position, slumped over. Kyphotic position, as it's called. The main exercises, lat pull down, two different variations. You have different deadlift variations, which is a compound movement. You have a bunch of stuff going on there. Rowing exercises, whether with a dumbbell or seated on a machine, hyperextension, and then external rotation of the humerus. And I'm going to focus mostly on these groupings up here and kind of wait for shoulders to hit the rotators of the humerus. So people will come in and they will literally look like this because they're doing this all day long. Head down, looking down, slouching down all day long. And you see more and more and more of this. You know, the shearing force is associated with this posture by having these muscles on the back of the neck have to support the head. It removes the natural curvature of the spine, and there is an actual flow-through effect to the rest of the spine. So again, when I say this, I mean this. As soon as you get somebody in there and you have them actually stand up, open up the chest, externally rotate the arms, and actually this is in you tend to see people now with the thumb forward position, in that neutral position. You tend to see actually people in a pronated position with their palms facing backwards. And if you go, if you ever go to a shopping mall or watch people walk around, I jokingly call those people Susie Fartswater, because as they're walking, they're kind of swatting the air behind them because their palms are behind them. They've internally rotated their shoulders and they're almost like collapsing forward. So the first part of this process is you really want to look at re-educating, showing your clients what is proper position, what is going to be the proper anatomical position: chest high, back flat, shoulders back, thumbs in a neutral position, not palms back. And to get there, you usually have to work on the anterior side of the body. You have to work on flexibility because all of this is short because they're hunched over all day long. And all of this back here is just weak, right? So you have to do two things. You have to work on the flexibility on one side and the strength on the other, with a dose of re-education there as well. I did put a link in here if you want to research this phenomenon a little bit more, and you can hopefully jump down some rabbit hole and find out more information regarding being in kyphosis and activities of daily living, et cetera, and see like what actually happens with people who sit at a computer all day long. So when you look at this, the main exercises, you have a lat pull down wide grip and a lat pull down narrow grip. You're usually confronted with the question, what does this one do versus this one do? Well, it's still back, it's still lats, it's still, you know, some T3-ish involvement, right? As you depress the shoulder blades, you have some bicep work and some forearm work. And when I talk with people, and I'll let these play here in a second and let them play side by side, when I talk with people, I'm like, look, you can literally do this on a Monday and then do this on next Monday. You could do a single arm lat pull down then on a Thursday or Friday and do a single arm lat pull down the next Thursday or Friday, or you can mix and match these. You know, you're not married into doing, oh, lat pull down wide every time you come in, or lat pull down narrow. So I'm going to let these play, and I urge you to watch these guys over and over a little bit and just kind of get an idea of the mechanics of how the elbow is bending, because it's a multi-joint exercise, shoulder and elbow, and what muscles are being used. So for each of those, right, there's this kind of positive negative phasing, and we know this from the previous presentations that as you're pulling down, it's your positive phasing, because that's when the back is actually contracting and going through its concentric contraction, and it's elongating on the way up. So it's positive on the way down, negative on the way up. I'll talk over this one. Positive phasing, negative phasing. Also the elbow is closing, elbow is opening. Positive phasing, negative phasing. Back is doing some work, biceps are doing some work. The elbow closes on the way down and opens on the way back up. Very common exercises to see. Russian deadlift, not so much, because usually people like to do seated row and work the muscles, the rhomboids in between the shoulder blades, or they'll do a lot of erector spinae by doing hyperextensions and only hyperextensions. Keep in mind when you do this, you are asking erector spinae to do some work, and you are asking rhomboids to do some work, because they have to stay in place to keep the flat back position. It's a tip from the hip position. Ear, shoulder, and hip are all in a straight line. The eyes are gazing down towards the floor, slightly out in front, where that blue line would be on the floor, not out the horizon, so the neck stays neutral. Also notice on this, when you compare these two, notice the hand position. It forces me into a pronated position. I'm rotating the shoulder inward, so I really have to work on keeping my shoulders peeled back, and that's the verbiage I literally use, is peel the shoulders back. Over here, I can have the hands brush along the side of my thighs, which allows me to stay more neutral in the shoulders. Same ear, shoulder, back position though. And you can see that a little bit better here, where that's a little more of a neutral, right? And this is more of a pronated position. Both are great. Both are fantastic exercises. Just keep in mind those bullet points. You're looking to have hip, shoulder, ear, and pretty much a straight line to work the muscles in that nether region in between where the rib cage ends and before the pelvis begins. Erector spinae group. And let's jump on over. Seated row, dumbbell row. So if you look at this, the resistance, line of resistance for both is the same. It's still perpendicular to my torso. Draw an ear between ear, shoulder, and hip. Draw a line between ear, shoulder, and hip. This resistance wants to be pulled straight to the floor. This is straight out in front of me. No matter what, it's still perpendicular to ear, shoulder, and hip. And it's still a multi-joint movement. You can mix this up by doing a single arm row over here, which is very common, which would be an almost direct cousin to this guy right here. But positioning wise, I think I might shoot a little how-to video on this. On this exercise, when you do a row, to get to this ear, shoulder, hip position to be flat, you have to be aware of the hand position relative to the shoulder, and the hand slightly out front. The knee has to be slightly behind the hip, and this knee has to be slightly behind the hip with the foot slightly outside of the hip. That allows this magic to happen. Otherwise, you'll see folks with a big old hump in their back because the hips are tucked underneath. I'll shoot a video on that and post it for you. Physio ball hyperextensions, right? So hyperextensions over a ball, hyperextensions with your feet locked in. The locked in foot position causes the musculature south of the border, if you will, in the legs, the hamstrings and the calves to fire because they're locked in differently than they would over here because you have the feet against the wall and friction is keeping the foot in place. Also on this, notice the body position relative to gravity versus the body position relative to gravity here. Where the resistance curve starts to kick in is different here than it is over here. I'll let these guys play. And oftentimes the mistake that's made on here is people will focus on, and they'll focus on hinging from the hip and hinging from the hip only. And the ball really provides a great tool to allow you to rotate over the ball and come up bit by bit. And the way I normally describe this is it's like you let the shoulders go and the fingers go towards the floor, the shoulder starts around and you go vertebrae by vertebrae, and then you come up bit by bit by bit, back down bit by bit by bit. And I'll actually use my fingers and articulate the spine for my clients just to give them that tactile response. Oftentimes you see people whipping from the hip in here. They're swinging down and swinging up, and oh my God, they're doing a horrible disservice to their back. A little more control is better for the general population. So now if we kind of compare a few things, here we have a little food for thought. We had our one-arm dumbbell row before. Now we have a dumbbell one-arm row. It's a ballistic row. I'll use this with wrestlers because there's a ton of eccentric loading with wrestlers, and they're grappling, they're pulling, etc. I want them to work the eccentric loading phase of this exercise or the negative phase. So we know this one. I'll pause him there. And this is nothing more than the same exercise, but we're just changing how the exercise is implemented. I'll literally drop the weight here and catch it. Catch. And the loading parameters on this are less because the forces are so much higher in terms of catching and really working the eccentric loading. Also, just food for thought, pay attention to the foot position, still the same. Foot is slightly outside of the hip, knee is slightly behind the hip, knee is slightly behind the hip, and the hand and the elbow are slightly out in front of the shoulder, allowing me to stay in a flat back position like over here. Eccentric loading over here, more traditional over here. We jump out here to this 45-degree, and the reason I'm throwing this one in is, notice now we can make this more of a transverse plane. Sagittal plane, transverse plane. And with this, you have sagittal plane, but the resistance less, more, less, more as we change the lever. So with that, guys, I hope that food for thought helps you. And I hope it kind of help paints a clearer picture in terms of some stuff you can do. With that, I'm signing off and look for more videos. Thanks. Bye.